Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the View from the Clipper podcast. I'm your host, James Warner. As always, I am joined this evening by Josh Sexton. Josh, how have you been this last week?
I feel like this is almost like a therapy check-in every time we do this now, James. We like give each other this look to be like, basketball's rubbish, isn't it? But I'm doing well within myself, I would say, as well as a tortured Clippers fan of what is it now, like 12 years, I think I've been following the Clippers for. This probably being not the lowest point, I wouldn't say, but definitely one of the worst like points of a regular season that I can remember in that time. I mean, it's 14 straight winning seasons, isn't it, before this one? And this one looks like it's ebbing away from us quicker and quicker. So, yeah, I feel like I'm holding up. How you holding up, buddy?
Yeah, I think we're having the same chat every week. It's like Groundhog Day at this point. Like, I don't know how much longer this is going to continue for. I think we spoke off air just like of how bad it's been and just like how more and more disengaged we're becoming with the games because we're just becoming desensitized to the Clippers just losing. Clippers now have won just one of their last 10 NBA games, which is just like I can't remember the last time I've said that, and they now sit at 6 wins and 20 losses. It's just it's become absolutely ridiculous. So I think we spoke about this, that it would probably be better just do like an overall year recap, relive some of the better times because 2025 has had some more high moments. Maybe the last few months since the new season has started, there hasn't been many. I can't think of many highs this season, but I think if we reflect back and think around the year in general, like there has been some high moments. I guess have there been any points this year, particularly in the early months, that have really caught your eye? Obviously, it was the first full year of Intuit Dome, and whilst it's not become the fortress it was last year, it was certainly became a fortress. And yeah, remind me when was your trip to LA, Josh? Was it last year or was it
It
earlier this
it
year?
was November 24, so yeah, te
Okay.
technically last year, like back end of last year, but
Mm.
start of last season, of course. And it was funny because that was around a time like it seems so long ago now because it feels like Intuit Dome is almost like a distant memory in terms of like the opening of that and the Clippers having their own arena and
Yeah.
how much of a big deal that was. That you can kind of forget as well. The Clippers had a horrible start to life at Intuit Dome, and my trip out to LA coincided with, basically the Clippers turning that around. I watched
Yeah.
four games while I was there, which was the Jazz at home, the Warriors at home, the Magic, and then the Kings in the NBA Cup. Um, and the Clippers won all four, and to be honest, won all four like relatively convincingly. I'd say at least three of them, or if not just two of them, were blowouts. The one against the Warriors was a little closer and a bit more defensive clinic from both teams on display. But even that's like their funny words to say now because you look at the Warriors and their aging roster at the moment, and it feels like they've got a lot of the same problems as the Clippers.
Yeah.
I guess their defense is a little bit more locked in at the moment than ours is. Maybe more of their problems are coming offensively, but I think it's kind of showing you. And the Sacramento Kings, I'd throw into that as well. All the California teams, weirdly, except for the Lakers, but
Yeah.
all the California teams struggling with aging rosters, poor roster construction, and then a lack of basketball fit at the moment, especially compared to God. Thinking back to my trip, which was a brilliant trip.
Yeah, I was hoping to get out this year, but it just didn't come off in the end. And maybe I'll plan a trip in 2026, and that's when the Clippers will turn around. Maybe I'll hope to have a similar effect that you have had previously in your appearance in LA, just sort of turning things for the team. But yeah, the Clippers were great at Intuit Dome in 2024, 2025, and a lot of that came this year, or at least earlier in the year. I think they ended up with a 30 and 11 win record at home last season. And like I said, a lot of those wins came in 2025. Even just in general, with I think Kawhi returning earlier this year, the Clippers put together an 18-3 run to eventually secure a top five seed, which I think a lot of fans and a lot of people in the media did not expect that from the Clippers at the start of the season. I think a lot of people were writing them off compared to this season, where I think a lot more have been higher on the Clippers given how they performed last year, the additions that they've made. But obviously that I think having Kawhi back, having obviously the first proper season into it dome just aided them in their in their journey to prove that they were a team that could still compete. And it was a great season, and it was I think their second consecutive 50 win season as well, and another winning season in the books for the team. So yeah, it's been a great year. Have you got any reflections yourself, Josh, just to sort of spread some positivity that, whilst things are bad right now, there have been some good moments and maybe there are some better moments to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I echo basically everything you've said there in terms of how the Clippers at least started this calendar year or, came into it. You sort of look back at the results and I'm like almost trying to jog my memory of, what happened in the games as you do look back because, the trouble is with NBA regular season, especially compared to, me and you being Premier League fans and Premier League games are much easier to remember because, well, I mean, you probably go to 19 of them if you go to all of your team's home games, and they're the ones that you'll distinctly remember, and then you'll remember most of the aways because they're sort of marked by you being in a certain place at a certain time. But with the Clippers, like I guess what's hard about being a UK basketball fan as well, like anyone who's based in the UK will relate to this. I end up watching most of these games in my bed, so a lot of them just like sort of like morph into the other almost. But the ones that really do sort of mark out in memory are the ones where get big results, and like I always watch these games before I go to work. So like I used to be like bouncing into work, being like, "Ah, the Clippers won that game." Like I feel really good. I'd put some like trash talking tweets and stories up, I'm sure, along the way to like cap off my morning of celebrating Clippers victories. And there were a lot of them to celebrate last season, and you're right to say there were a lot of them at Intuit Dome. But like the ones that I can think of as well as like the Knicks, the Clippers, sorry, going to the Knicks, playing against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden and managing to pull out a win there, and all of these things are like uh, felt like they were marked out by this like defensive identity that the Clippers had established, and a lot of that, like I was actually thinking about it a little bit earlier today in terms of like you referenced how does this get better for the Clippers. And I was listening to the Zach Lowe show where they were talking about the Warriors, mainly him and Michael Pina, who's another NBA analyst, and they were basically talking about the Warriors' struggles. And it was then that it dawned on me that like me and Drew had spoken about the Sacramento Kings on Crossover the Pond and that sort of triangle, as I've mentioned, of old California teams with poorly constructed rosters. One of the main things most of them are missing, maybe besides Golden State to an extent, but the sort of youth that Golden State have is a core of youth that can't contribute. Like it's pretty clear there's a trade coming for Jonathan Kuminga. He's like completely out of the rotation now. Moses Moody has kind of showed that he's only really a rotation piece. So they're not that even their younger guys are not guys that can necessarily impact winning basketball. The Sacramento Kings have got no young guys really besides maybe Keegan Murray, who can even break into the rotation, let alone impact winning basketball. And then the same with the Clippers. But what the Clippers had last season was that the Clippers did get a little bit younger, and some of that was just by virtue of the arrival of Derek Jones Jr. and Chris Dunn really. And Chris Dunn is sneakily old. He is older than you think, and I don't know whether there's been a sort of drop off this season because of his age, or whether it's even harsh to say that there's been any kind of drop off in his game really. But it felt like him and Derek Jones Jr. just came and immediately instilled this like defensive identity into the team that it needed. And basically what you ended up with was particularly when Kawhi was out for like, large swathes of the season. Again, you had James Harden and Norman Powell, which was effectively, I mean, Norman was kind of playing the three, wasn't he, as opposed to really playing the two. It was more like James and Chris in the backcourt, Norm at the three, Derek Jones Jr. at the four, and then Zoo at the five. And basically what you ended up with was, sometimes the shooting would look bad on some nights, the spacing would look bad because teams would just play off Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. and let those guys shoot. But equally, what you ended up with was one of the best defenses in the NBA, and a lot of that was
Yeah.
down to, the defensive chops of those two guys, the grit of Norman Powell, which is something that we miss so much now, and how Norman almost felt like a shot of youth at times and an energy that the Clippers just don't have on this roster anymore. And Derek Jones Jr.'s obviously been missing with an injury this season. I don't think we can underestimate how big that injury has been for the Clippers, really. And the sooner he can come back now, the better. And it seems like his return is probably around the corner, which will hopefully be, at least give us some green shoots of recovery because those three people, I think in particular, those three players are the ones that are really like missing from the identity this season. And suddenly you've got a team that doesn't look like it wants to defend, and I think a lot of that is down to mentality. You've got guys like James Harden and Ivica Zubac and Kawhi Leonard who are all still stepping up in terms of like the counting stats, but the eye test with all three of those guys at the moment is like not a lot of effort and energy, and maybe you expect that from James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, particularly at this stage, in their careers, but. Ivica Zubac again, his second team all defense last season in contention for DPOY. So he's not a guy you expected a defensive drop off from. So sorry, I've gone long on this answer, James. Basically, I started off being like, we were good at Madison Square Garden, but the reason we were so good at Madison Square Garden against a Knicks team that had, so much defensive grit, and even this season still has, have just won the NBA Cup the night before we record this, and it felt like to me it was just built on like grit and determination, and like this that roster is so united now, and the Clippers have almost you could like chart it back to that point. The Clippers winning in Madison Square Garden. The Clippers are so together. There's so much grit throughout that roster. Norman Powell, I believe it was around the time of the All-Star game, that Knicks game. I'm just going to double check the date of that because it was around the time at least that Norm was being tipped to be an All-Star, if not sort of already. It was
Yeah.
26th of March, so it was just after Norm had been sort of snubbed as an All-Star. But even then, like you really felt that like Norm Powell was taking that personally. Um, and he ends up with what is it, 19 points in this one. James Harden and Kawhi Leonard going off because Kawhi's returned. By this point, Derrick Jones Jr. 12 points off the bench after he'd been dropped out for Kawhi. Zubac 18, so it's, already five guys there in double digits, and Chris Dunn even came up with 9 points of his own. So you've gone from a roster that was so together, so gritty, so determined, beating a roster that was so gritty, so together, so determined, to that roster has continued on their upward trajectory, and unfortunately for the Clippers. That's just completely fallen apart for, as we've discussed throughout this season, a multitude of reasons, really.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that game out of the bunch because that's a game I remember as well. I think it was part of that 10 wins in 11 games to sort of see out the season. And I feel like that's when like the Clippers really started to come together as a team, like just tr to try and deliver the team into a good seed, into a good spot for the playoffs. And it really felt like going into the playoff series against Denver, like the team were more ready than ever. And I think that was like a perfect example of one of those games along the way, which could have been a tricky opponent that ultimately, if we lose that game and a few others like potentially could have slipped down a few seeds. Like it was so tight at that point. I think, there's even a chance through I think even some of those last few games of last season where we could have even slipped into the play-in spots, and they could have been out of the playoffs entirely. So that was one of like the definite key wins of the season. Part like I said, like I mentioned just before this, part of that 18-3 run when Kawhi Leonard returned, and it was just like yeah, like beforehand the team had been functioning sort of around like those sort of play in playoff spots, and that was a surprise to many people. And I just loved the grit, loved the effort. I think a lot of people even sort of likened it to like a return to how the Clippers were in 2021, 2019. They just had that defensive mentality which we hadn't seen in a long time, like at least since the 2021 years for 2-1-3 in particular. So and obviously a lot of that was down to Jeff Van Gundy and the mentality that he has put on the team, but also the personnel as well. And highlighting, the additions of Chris Dunn and Derrick Jones Jr. last year sort of allowed us to go through that defensive mentality, build that defensive mindset, and it's just saddening that the massive drop off. We still have those two players on our roster. We still have Jeff Van Gundy, yet we're currently the fourth worst defense in the league. It's absolutely baffling. Yeah, it's definitely a mindset thing, but also personnel. And we can get into obviously to sort of highlight some of like the off-season changes that the team decided was the way to go for the Clippers. But I think also it's worth highlighting probably some of the most important games the Clippers played this year which was that playoff series against Denver, and like I was saying, just coming fresh off that 18-3 run, the last game of the season being a dramatic overtime win against the Golden State Warriors, where James Harden and Kawhi just both dominated. They both look fresh, ready to go. But I think maybe showed the importance of like not leaving it too late, and having Kawhi off the roster for so long, he just didn't look himself in that Denver series. And whilst, we even went up 2-1 in the series, it was just a bit too much of an ask to go all the way. But, to take that team to seven, I think just left like a really good feeling. And I don't think too many Clipper fans were disappointed. It was just maybe like a bit of too much of an ask against the Denver team that is clearly like one of the best in the league. And then, in the next series ended up taking Oklahoma City Thunder to seven
Yeah.
games. So like I think that just showed like where the Clippers were at a point in time. Like they could have easily gone, fairly toe to toe with the Thunder as well. If they win that game seven, like who knows what could have happened this year. Could have found some energy from somewhere, and grinded out a win against the Thunder. Like, what could have happened? Who knows? Like that will forever be in the history books as an unknown. And unfortunately, the off-season moves just hasn't set the Clippers up to maintain that level. And rightly so, they proved, like I mentioned, they proved some doubters wrong last year, but that in turn has sort of created expectations for this season. And the older James Harden and Kawhi have got, the higher the expectations go for, the Clippers need to deliver a championship. It's been like that for the last 5-6 years that we've had Kawhi and PG on the roster. So for it to fall off this hard is incredibly disappointing. But I think we can look back at, at least at least half of 2025 fondly, because I thoroughly enjoyed the first half of this year when it comes to Clippers basketball. The off season was obviously pretty fun as well. With the rumors and all the names that eventually did land on the Clippers. We can even go back to our first episode since returning, and how kind of excited but maybe pessimistic we'd got about this new season. And yeah, it feels like the former has sort of taken over there, where it has just been like an incredibly disappointed ride. And in my years supporting the Clippers, I've never felt like such a high and low feeling from coming out of that Denver series, thinking, oh, like, we build on this, like next season could be good. We've got a healthy Kawhi Leonard, maintain like those key players around the edges. But I think it was Norman Powell's departure that in a way is kind of like signaled the end of what was a great team last year. It was a fantastic team, and I think a lot of people were high off it. So I know I know we want to try and pull as much positivity out of last season as possible, but obviously we do have to talk about this season a little, Josh. And where do you think things have gone wrong? And I know we've spoke about this a few times on the podcast, but in terms of like doing a retrospective over the season, what would you think was like the key transition out of last season being so good into this season, where now we're looking at a Clippers team which is potentially bottom five teams in the league?
I've mentioned before that I think there's probably a multitude of reasons really, and I actually want to just hark back one more time just before I go on, but it's sort of to like lead me into this really. Is we've mentioned that Knicks game, and you sort of reminded me because you're like, oh, it was during that run where like the Clippers, like I think you said it was like a 10 and 11 or something, but there was basically that spell where the Clippers lost by 2 points to the OKC Thunder. I remember I was in Australia at the time and like could watch that game live because of the time difference, and the Clippers were just incredible, and they lost basically off the back of a pretty controversial refereeing decision, which is how a lot of teams lose to the OKC Thunder. Well, at least last season they did. Most teams get blown out by the OKC Thunder these days, but a lot of games last season that were close against the OKC Thunder were kind of decided by, you know, 50-50 refereeing decisions and things like that. And the Clippers fell foul to one of them. And then the very next game, literally within like a night or two, the Clippers went to Madison Square Garden from being in LA against the Thunder and went and did that to the Knicks. And it was that time where like you basically felt like the Clippers were not untouchable because they'd lost to the OKC Thunder, but like nothing could take so much of like a scot off them really. Like there was no weak links in the armory. Yeah, maybe they weren't as good as the OKC Thunder, but the OKC Thunder were still the best team in the NBA last season and go on to be champions. And they lose a couple of games later to the Cavs, but again there was no shame in that because the Cavs were the best team in the East last season. And even when they do that, they then go to Orlando the next game and win in what is like an absolute dogfight of a game in Orlando. And then from there, from that moment of beating Orlando and losing to the Cavs, they don't lose again for the rest of the season. And that's what you referenced that run and how the Clippers had, bits of adversity during that run in the same way they've had bits of adversity coming into this season. And that'll be the things that I sort of talk about within this really. But they bounced back from that adversity, and I think that is down to having, energy guys in the locker room as well as like I'm not going to completely like put this all on James and Kawhi because as I say there are a multitude of reasons, but like James and Kawhi helped steer that ship at times last season as well. God, James Harden was like the superstar of last season for the
Hmm.
Clippers. Really, like we may retrospectively look back now and say, the Norm was that guy for so much of it, and we're absolutely right to like we can't overstate Norman Powell's influence on last season, but James Harden was just absolutely unbelievable during that regular season and dragged the Clippers through so much. And yeah, he may not be the most like rah energy guy in the same way that, Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. and Norman Powell felt like they could just electrify the arena at any point. But James had the ability to do that with his play. Like he's not a guy who necessarily is always running his mouth. I know he used to be a bit more that kind of style, but these days you're seeing a way more chilled out version of James Harden on the court, where like the most he kind of taunts opponents or anything is like that stare down into the camera that we had. I don't know if that was last season or season before. I think it was the season before because Paul George was around at that time, and like that is kind of who James became last season really for the Clippers was this like nonchalant star, and then you had your other nonchalant star come back, and the Clippers were able to just like really put it all together, and it was capped off by that win against the Warriors in overtime at the back end of the season. And then you referenced the Denver series, but I'm not even sure if he said, and forgive me if you did say, and I just missed it, but like the Clippers lost one of those games by a buzzer beating alley-oop dunk.
Yep.
Like again, it's a bit like the I don't know if it's another British expression, but like if my aunt had wheels, she'd be a bike kind of thing. But you can do that forever, like coulda, shoulda, woulda. But like the Clippers were literally that close to going. I think was that to go two up in the series or to I think I'm pretty sure it was to go 3-1, wasn't it? They end up
Yeah,
tying
it
the
was.
series at 2-2 there. They get blown out the next game. Um, so just like yeah, unbelievable fine margins that the Clippers suffered from there really. And as you say, I mean, God knows the Clippers had fought so hard by that point, so you don't know what would have been to come against the OKC Thunder, but you kind of felt like anything was possible in the world. And then the Clippers go into the summer, and like I almost don't want to be too like Captain Hindsight about all these things because again I'm sure I've referenced it on the podcast before, but you could go back in our Clippers UK group chat and I'm sure you'd find bits from me rationalising the Norman Powell trade, bits from you probably James, not to throw you under the bus, but rationalising sorry the Norman Powell
Yeah.
trade because like Norman Powell was near enough due for an extension, and the Clippers probably didn't want to pay Norman Powell, but like you look at Norman Powell's 20 million this season to Miami Heat, and it looks like an absolute bargain. Like most good role players are on roughly 20 million these days with the the way the salary cap's going up, and particularly the way that teams are kind of I guess getting around the new CBA and all the regulations around that is that there's more guys that are on kind of like team friendly deals that are that step between like what a rotational role player is and what the star player is. And Norman Powell sits in that sort of in that area, I guess, or that section perfectly. And he did it for so much of last season. He continues to do it for Miami this season. In fact, he's probably arguably been the second star behind Bam Adebayo because Tyler Herro's been out for most of the season, if not the star. And then Tyler Herro's come back, and it feels like it's a three-headed monster now rather than a two-headed monster. And the Clippers are like suffering for having lost that. And not only did they lose that, they then brought in a few more of those sort of nonchalant old vets. And we thought that one of them was going to be Chris Paul, I guess, but we also like whatever we thought Chris Paul was going to be. I think we were all just so happy that the Chris Paul story was going to end with this amazing like footnote, and he'd have his jersey hung in the rafters, and like whatever really happened to this season, like we'd be watching the Chris Paul retirement tour. So like, we were prepared to stomach what may have been like to us worst case scenario in our minds, having to sort of suffer through the play-in or being those um low play-in spots and maybe not make it to the playoffs, but like it was fine because our boy was home, and we were going to see his jersey hung in the rafters, and maybe that would then lead to Blake Griffin having his jersey hung in the rafters as well. And it felt like Chris and Blake had this really like nice rekindling of their respect for each other, really, which it felt like had ebbed away, particularly when you think back to Chris's time on the Rockets when Blake was still on the Clippers, and the secret tunnel fights and all those kinds of things. It felt like we'd had that back, and we got this almost like sense of nostalgia and love for the Clippers back with that, really. And that was like such an incredible thing to live through and to be a part of at the time. And then quite quickly what happens is all the aspiration stuff comes out, and I don't think we can understate the importance that that's had. And I heard on the Bill Simmons podcast that I was listening to today. I think it might have come out literally just this morning. But Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe are basically intimating that we're going to find out soon what the punishment is for Steve Ballmer and the Clippers. And Bill Simmons kind of used the word punishment over and over again, and then like double backed on himself. So, I mean, I would presume there is going to be a punishment that's coming around the corner. So that's nice. That can add to this horrendous season for the Clippers, that we know there's some kind of punishment coming around the corner. But like that definitely had an impact on the locker room, unfortunately. And then, as we mentioned, the guy who was brought in to replace Norman Powell immediately goes down with an injury quite quickly after, before he's even barely played any games for the Clippers. That becomes a season-ending injury. Derek Jones Jr. goes down for a large period of time. The Chris Paul stuff all then unravels, and I think like it's just been this like domino effect of things that are bad for the locker room and the culture, and things that like seep into the mentality negatively. And we've already mentioned that the mentality was one of the best things about last season, really. It was one of the things that was the foundation of the defense, the foundation of why the Clippers were so good at Intuit Dome, the foundation of how they bounced back from tough losses to the Thunder and the Cavs to go on the winning runs that they did at the time. And yet that mentality is completely ebbed away from the Clippers this season. And even to the point now of, you mentioned how good Jeff Van Gundy had been this season. The new information that's coming out now about Jeff Van Gundy and his relationship with Chris Paul is kind of making me think, well, like, is Jeff Van Gundy actually all he's talked up to be, if he can't even like take this from a guy like Chris Paul? So it kind of causes you to question all corners of this from the franchise, really. And like you say, the personnel is still there, so you'd like to believe there is a way that the Clippers can kind of get back to this. But to be honest, like I think the Clippers just need to start trading away some of these pieces now. One of the positive things that did come from that Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe podcast, because there's a couple of little gems in there about the Clippers that people might have missed, is that apparently GMs around the league have been ringing the Clippers for Ivica Zubac, or at least like I think they said it's like the Sharks are kind of circling around Ivica Zubac, and the Clippers have been pushing people away, basically, by the sounds of it. So me and you have both said, James, how much we want Ivica Zubac to stay a part of this core, like that goes into the next chapter of Clippers basketball. I definitely still want that to be the case. I definitely still want Derek Jones Jr. to be around. I definitely still want Chris Dunn to be around. Um, the jury's still kind of out on John Collins. Like, if he was part of a trade that I felt like was positive for the team, I wouldn't be overly upset by it. But equally, if he was still part of that team that went into the next year of the Clippers, I wouldn't be upset about that either. And basically everything else beyond that is dispensable to me. Like, Kobe Sanders is maybe someone who kind of kicks around on the fringes for me, in terms of like, do I want him to be a next part of the Clippers? Again, he's probably similar to John Collins, to be honest, in that like, if he was great, if he wasn't, no sort of tears or sleepless nights over that. So I feel like there still can be some kind of way the Clippers end this season in like any kind of positive fashion. My biggest worry at the moment is it feels like the Clippers are just kind of looking at standing pat, and if they're going to stand pat, then like, well, I mean, it's going to start with them getting absolutely bludgeoned by OKC. I'm planning to put this out tomorrow, just sort of doing on-air admin with you, James. So this
Yeah.
this will go out on the Thursday, so it's going to be on the day of the OKC game, and I'm expecting that the Clippers get one holy show of a blowout against the OKC Thunder, and then eventually. As a thanking for that spanking, the Clippers are going to hand over this lovely lottery pick to the OKC Thunder at the end of the season, and unless they make any kind of trades. Like again, I'm sorry, like I'm going on here, but I keep referencing it on episodes we've done in the past. Like the Jazz have their own pick. Like they want to tank this season. There's teams ahead of the Clippers that want to tank this season. Sacramento Kings have their own pick. They want to tank. Like the Clippers have an opportunity to leapfrog these teams and to still get into the back end of that play-in. But they need to start acting like a serious basketball team. And to be honest, like if Lawrence Frank and Steve Ballmer and Tyler or whoever, I don't know if Michael Wing is still around the organization, but if they were all on this call now, I'd be saying to them like, you aren't showing this is that you're trying to be serious about this basketball team becoming a winning basketball team or sneaking into that play in and getting to a point where you can start to win games of basketball again. Um, if you're not going to make some trades, because this roster right now, I can absolutely promise you, is not going to turn this thing around.
Yeah, and the longer they wait to make that trade, the worse it's getting. Like you said,
Exactly. Yeah.
there's no rest for the Clippers right now with the Oklahoma City Thunder waiting to just put the dagger in just a little bit further, you know. And I feel like they don't even need to show up tomorrow. They can sort of have a fun play around with the Clippers because they've been beating teams by an average of some of the over like 10 points a game this season, which is like sort of historic levels. And they'll probably be out for a little bit of revenge after the disappointing exit from the NBA Cup, and they probably felt like that was one thing they could have won, and they're probably looking forward to partying in Vegas and the payday, which they unfortunately for them weren't able to accomplish in the end. So I'm not I don't know if they've played since that get lost to the Spurs, but if the Clippers is next man up, then I'm sure they're like rubbing their hands and licking their lips because yeah, like you said, not only is this potentially an easy game for them, it's also the opportunity to push the Clippers further towards maybe delivering them a lottery pick. And yeah, I think if you just like if you was to hold like the end of last season to this now, it's just like how have we got here? Like I don't know whether last season was, in a way a bit masked. Maybe some of the flaws were a bit masked. Obviously, I know that the off-season moves have certainly contributed, and like you mentioned, like the aspiration things and the uncertainty around that. I think it is really just a culmination of everything. I don't think like anytime there are like these things happen in life, like I don't think it's usually there's not one big event, like it's a combination of multiple factors, and I think that is literally the case here with the Clippers. And like I said, like changes desperately need to be made. There are no signs of improvement unless some of the younger players start really developing and moving on an upwards trajectory. Like I don't know what's going to change. Just sticking with it and hoping that something is going to change is obviously not working because the Clippers have now lost 20 games this year. And it's just that number is just going to grow. And the more that number grows, the less likely the Clippers are to do anything. I think we mentioned this on the last pod, but the fact that, as you mentioned, teams like the Utah Jazz are sitting above them is embarrassing, but may actually help the Clippers as we turn a page of 2025 into 2026, where these teams aren't going to be incentivized to win. And really, teams who are winning, who want to win, like the Clippers, who are below them, should naturally move up. And if they don't, I'm sorry, then everyone needs to go. The house needs to be cleared out because I am not going to sit here and accept the Clippers having a worse record than teams who are excited about getting a lottery, who are going to be in the lottery, are going to have worse odds than the Clippers who don't want to be in there. Like it's the most baffling, outrageous situation. One of the craziest in sports that I can remember in a long time. This situation with the Clippers right now. There's a few like good points you made in there, Josh, particularly about Norman Powell, and I will definitely hold my hands up and say like I rationalized it. I thought, yep, fine. I can see what you're trying to do here. It's, almost using what he was saying about Paul George by like addition by subtraction. I could see it. I could see them trying to fill a need in John Collins, but also, potentially get, not the same output, but similar output in a guy like Brad Bill. I guess the Clippers have just been very unfortunate that he has been injured. Not that he showed, I think, any glimpses of offering that kind of output, but ultimately they have been burnt here by the fact that he has gone down injured for the season. I don't think that was necessarily like an expected injury, like maybe guys like Kawhi and even Bradley Beal has had his fair share of injuries, but I think that was maybe more of just a crazy one that you can't really prepare for. But ultimately, you take risks like this. You've got a sure thing in Norman Powell. You take the risk. You jump to John Collins and Bradley Beal, and ultimately, it's not only backfired. It's tanked the Clippers season really. Because Clippers just don't have anything else in the scoring department right now. I was looking back at the playoff series, Game 7. I wonder if that is what left, and there are probably other games. Yeah, I'm not going to call out other games, but I don't know if that was the game where Clippers fans were like cut ties with Norman Powell. He dropped 9 points in that game, and just looking back at it now, I think that's quite, it's unfair because James Harden didn't even score 9 points, scored 7 points in that game. No one was calling for his head. I do remember distinctly a lot of fans being annoyed by Norman Powell in that series. I thought he had a handful of good games. Even in some losses, he had some good games, but he's never really been like the playoff performer. And I think maybe that's what we saw at the time. I'm just trying to think back and just like remember my headspace with it. I think we just got to the point where we recognized Norman Powell as a regular season player and maybe not a postseason player, but I think that's just the wrong mentality to have nowadays because, as we've seen, the regular season is so competitive this year. Having a guy like Norman Powell, it's the old cliche where you're like you don't know what you have until it's gone, and I think the Clipper fans are really feeling that right now. I don't know if there are still fans out there who are like rationalizing that move, but to me, yeah, just completely wrong move. I know hindsight is 2020. The Clippers obviously haven't benefited from having Bradley Beal now that he's got a season-ending injury, and that's not helpful at all. We don't know the potential of the change, of the risk, but like you said, like the contract wasn't even that crazy. He's continuing to prove, as he did last year, that he is worth the money, and given the Clippers situation, it like now the offseason moves just felt like a risk that the team couldn't take. They needed to keep the assets and just letting Norm Powell go for that kind of contract. You know, if the Clippers are the same record right now, they've got Norman Powell. That's another asset the Clippers could have traded away. They could have help the situation better. But they can't trade Bradley Beal now. Negative value. He would probably had negative value at the start of the season. He had to get bought out. No one could even trade Bradley Beal. I don't even know if he was tradable on the deal they got him in the end. It was the mid-level exception in the end, which again was maybe even that was a bit expensive for Bradley Beal. Again, we don't know. We don't know Bradley Beal. Can't say for certain. Who knows if what levels he would have got to. But yeah, I think just thinking about 2026, the front office have a lot of questions to answer, and I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Josh, on like where they go from here or just anything at all. I know there was a meeting recently with fans who sit in the swell. From what I hear, fans weren't particularly happy with that meeting. I think first and foremost they were told not to record it, which I can understand from a PR perspective, but I don't think the Clippers PR can get any worse. I actually think all fans need to hear from Lawrence Frank right now, not just the fans in the swell. I think fans in the swell deserve it more than anyone else for an answer because they pay the hard-earned money. They turn up to all the games. I would expect an answer first and foremost from them, but I think the rest of the fans, everyone else who goes to the games, everyone else who supports from anywhere in the US to across the world deserved to hear what he had to say that night. But even then, it from what I've read from fans who went to that, not a lot was said anyway. So, I can beat the drum of should have allowed the fans to record it. It sounded like a lot of the same from Lawrence Frank. I think he started by apologizing and then going through the reasons why they've made certain moves and finishing up with nothing is expect. They're not ultimately. I think he ended it with saying they're not expected to change anything, which is not great for us. Not a good look, and it makes me worry for 2026. Are there any hopes on the horizon for next year, Josh? Where do we go from here? Where does the front office go from here? What do you want to see happen next year?
I'd like to believe there is at least some hope on the horizon for 2026, literally in terms of just like a new season will have started and will have been through an off season at least by that point. But like as you say, the sort of quotes from Lawrence Frank about how it doesn't seem like things are going to change, and even the other week when he was saying that Ty Lue is going to be the head coach of the Clippers for a very long time, and there's been rumors about Lawrence Frank getting a new contract as well. It just feels like these are Bournemouth guys, and ultimately, like the thing that annoys me with all of these like really PR managed exercises, of which like this is one, like whether it's unprecedented or not, whether it's like people see it as really great access that this head of basketball operations is speaking to the fans. Like if he's speaking to the fans the way he still speaks to the media, then it's a completely pointless endeavor. Like the whole point of sitting in a room with fans is that you allow fans to ask you more difficult questions than maybe some people in the media will. And by the way, like I hate the narrative that some Clippers fans adopt about some of the media, because like I've been in those press conferences, I've met those guys in the media, and a lot of them ask the very difficult questions. The problem is the answer they get is always PR managed, whether it's by Kawhi Leonard, whether it's by James Harden, whether it's by Lawrence Frank, whether it's by Ty Lue. Like people like these athletes and people who are media trained to the high hills don't just sit there and go, you've asked me a really difficult question there, so I'm just going to spill every bit of tea that I have about like what's going on behind the scenes. Like it's just not the way it works. And
No.
unfortunately, I imagine that all of Steve Ballmer's businesses, and the reason that he's a billionaire is because he doesn't just dish all his dirty laundry on all these businesses and things as well. I'm sure he's, cracked loads of eggs down the years to make his, very successful omelets. And, people won't know about those cracked eggs. The eggshells just kind of get discarded, and then you get this lovely looking omelet in front of you. And I mean, if what Steve Ballmer has produced in terms of business or omelets, then I mean, God knows what the Clippers are at the moment. Some sort of like eggy mess. Um, but like that's exactly the way that I expected that Lawrence Frank encounter to go. I'm not surprised if people feel like they were disappointed. I hope that some of those fans who were there, if they ever thought like, oh, the media don't ask difficult enough questions, realize that actually it's because these people don't give the answers that aren't PR managed. They don't give difficult answers. They give answers that satisfy the party line and things like that. And you never really truly get an insight into what things are like in these organizations until you get sort of pieces like what Ramona Shelburne's produced in the last few days about the end days of Chris Paul. And even then, like it leaves you questioning, like, why can't Lawrence Frank just say some of that stuff? Like if that's coming out in a couple of days anyway from Ramona, like why does Lawrence Frank not just sit there and go, uh, full transparency, Chris basically fell out with Jeff Van Gundy, then fell out with Ty Lue. Um, the reading between the lines of the basically the one star player who's not mentioned in that piece is James Harden, is that Chris and James didn't exactly have a great relationship either. Chris's antics rubbed loads of people up the wrong way, and we basically decided that he was contributing to the toxic culture so much more than basically any other thing here, and he was a net negative, even in terms of, to you as the fans, this being a positive storyline at the end of the season. We felt like cutting Chris Paul would help us to win basketball games at some point down the line. Then I feel like people might have been like, all right, you know what, respect Lawrence Frank, but he just does this like PR managed thing again, where he's like, yeah, no, big respect to Chris. We really didn't want this to happen. It's like, well, you did. Like, you did want it to happen because you made it happen at 11 p.m. in Atlanta in your hotel room. Like, you made it happen, so you did want it to happen. Like, stop telling us you didn't want it to happen. Like, like that just line drives me crazy. Like, we didn't want it to end like this. Like, no, you did because you made the decision for it to end like this. So, yeah, the no more PR managed BS from the Clippers. No more of like, I don't want to hear guys like constantly coming out and being like, "Oh no, I take responsibility for this." Like Ty's done it so much this season. Lawrence Frank started doing it. I understand in terms of the roster construction, but like it's not like Lawrence Frank's in there defending the paint and not keeping up with guys on a night to night basis. So I'm sick of hearing guys taking like false accountability at this stage. Like take some actual accountability for what happens next for the franchise, and you might make me feel a little bit better about it. But in the meantime, I'm probably just gonna still be over here ranting my head off, even when James finally stops this recording and stops me talking.
I loved the egg analogy. I think there's just
The
there's
eggy
just
mess.
all the eggs have gone off. All the eggs have passed the use by
They are
date. They're
stinky. They're
start
like those century eggs that they eat in I'm a Celebrity.
yeah,
100
they're
100-year-old stinky eggs.
they're rotten, and to be fair, we're sitting here and we're asking for them to try and sell rotting eggs, and they've probably got one or two good ones that maybe they can part with, but yeah, it's just a mess right now, and I don't have faith in Lawrence Frank's future, and if Steve Ballmer wants to keep him around and wants to keep everything as usual, I don't understand that at all. I always penned Steve Ballmer as the guy, sort of the driving force behind the Clippers' ambition over the last few years, and obviously the big swing that he endorsed for Kawhi and Paul George and building into it dome, but it's like everything has just seems to have gone stale all around him. And I can't speak for his involvement in the team, but ultimately he's the one in the position who can ultimately get rid if needs be. He can call the shots. And yeah, I think he's in a way equally to blame for where the Clippers find themselves at this point. And he's gonna pay just as much as we are. Obviously, he wants us to win. He wants the Intuit Dome to sell seats, sell tickets, and I don't know how that's gonna happen going forward. I think as you sort of touched on earlier in the pod, the sort of shiny newness has sort of rubbed off. Obviously, there are still fans like me who have not been there. There are fans in the UK, there are fans, across the globe who would still love to make that trip, and I'm sure that will still happen. I'm sure they'll still get the fair tourist, but it's the fans who continue to stick by the team, the fans who buy the season tickets, the fans who buy the merch, even just building new fans, the next generation of fans, like what they're selling right now. I just feel like they're going to start losing buyers and it's going to start hitting them. And I think that is when the big swings are made. I think it's probably lucky that this is happening at the end of this window. The Clippers can move off a lot of contracts next year, but I just don't feel comfortable giving the power and the responsibility of who spends that money to the same people that have got it in this mess and in this position. I feel like there's no point wiping the player slate clean if the guys in charge of making the decisions, who the people who've made the off season and decisions, the coaches, etc., everyone who's contributed to the Clippers getting in this situation will still be around. Like I'm all for changing the roster. I think it needs to happen, but ultimately I think the Clippers need a new strategy because this one clearly has they've lost road with it, and we need to see some big change, not just on the player side of trades, but I also think within the franchise as well. There needs to be more transparency with the fans. I think they do great by the fans, or they have like to start into it dome. Like it's clearly an arena that's been built for the fans. The ticket pricing, the way they want to keep opposition fans out of Clipper fans' seats. But I feel like that is wearing off now, and when that starts to wear off, and your true fan base starts to turn, is where big change is needed. We've seen it in all sports. I think I'm probably going to start seeing it for my beloved team, Tottenham Hotspur, that the good times do run out very quickly, and you will start to feel it if you don't start responding to your fans, because ultimately they're the end consumers, and I just don't see a market for the Clippers without Intuit Dome and the newness and the excitingness of it. If you're just going to go and watch a team get drastically beat every week, there's not going to be that hardcore fan base, which is what Intuit Dome was sold on. It was sold on the atmosphere, the electricity, and being behind the team. But ultimately, you need a basketball team that can create that can respond to that can build that up, and that just seems to have been lost this year. And I guess it remains to be seen whether this is just one down year and things will turn around. But yeah, I'm not excited for 2026. If there's one thing I'm excited about, it's just like a fresh start. And I hope if, a trade isn't made in the next 2 weeks before we end the year, there will be one, if not many, next year, and new free agent signings, which we can get into as and when the time comes. I've been kind of keeping an eye on my phone through this pod, Josh, just to see if anything pops up, but it's still dead quiet
Praying,
from
praying that it would.
praying that we'd get some exclusive news to share on this podcast. But yeah, it's 7 p.m. UK time on the 17th, and we still don't have any news, and the Clippers will be suiting up the same way they've been suiting up all season against Oklahoma City Thunder tomorrow. And I'm not looking forward to it, Josh. Not looking forward to it at all.
No, me neither. To be honest, what I have just been looking at, James, to just try and give us a little bit of something is the realistic trade destinations for Kawhi Leonard and James Harden because I got caught out a little bit on the NBA podcast earlier where like I made the prediction that I think Kawhi will be traded at some point, and Drew basically asked me who he thinks too, and I was like maybe the Detroit Pistons, but I don't know how those salaries would work. But it's just like Detroit are a team that may be looking to get over the hump. But so here are the Kawhi Leonard destinations. They got the Phoenix Suns with a trade package that would consist of Jalen Green and Grayson Allen. They've got the Miami Heat, which would just be funny, in a trade centered around Andrew Wiggins. They've got the Golden State Warriors, which they admitted will be a difficult trade to construct unless the Warriors are willing to move on from Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green. Um, they said the likes of Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Pozinski, and Mo Moody could be intriguing for the Clippers, but the sides would need a third or fourth team to facilitate a deal. So basically means that a third or fourth team has to come in to like actively help the Clippers or the Warriors get off the money that they're trying to get off, and I don't really see that happening at the moment. Unless someone just wants OKC to not get that pick with their whole heart, and that's the reason they decide to do it. And then there is a Toronto one, and there's a Toronto one and the James Harden one as well. But they've said it has to be centered around Brandon Ingram, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, and Jakob Portal. And at that point, I just think like, why would the Raptors do that? Because Brandon Ingram's playing well this season. Jakob Portal
No,
contributes to
that's not
winning
happening.
basketball.
No.
Quickly, there's question marks over. And RJ Barrett's been decent off the bench for them this season too. So I don't see why they do that deal. But then for James Harden. They've got the Bucks, who could use Bobby Portis and Kyle Kuzma's salaries. They've got Trae Young at the Atlanta Hawks, which I have to say did really intrigue me. You may have seen me stroking my chin at one point there, James,
Okay.
as you were going through. And then the Memphis Grizzlies with Ja Morant was another one, which is like Ja and Trae, the two guys whose trade values have probably fallen a little bit this season, but still have potential high upside. Like I would be surprised if the Clippers traded for Ja Morant. To be honest, I would say it's more likely they trade for Trae Young, but who knows? Um, and then the Chicago Bulls, it says they have an abundance of, in fact, it's not cleanest fits in the Bulls of ball dominantly guarding Josh Giddey. In terms of salary structure, however, it's a perfect destination for James Harden. They have an abundance of expiring salaries in Nikola Vucevic, Kevin Huerter, Zach Collins, Ayo Dosunmu, who I know Jay, who's part of our Clippers group chat, has been banging the drum hugely for Ayo Dosunmu, and
Yep.
Kobe White who I've been banging the drum for a little bit on this podcast too. So some intriguing destinations for the two guys on there, but they may just remain intriguing and not realistic because Lawrence Frank just doesn't want any of us to have any fun. So that's a shame, isn't it? Thanks, Lawrence
Yeah.
Frank.
It's an interesting question to ask though, Josh, because it's like, will James Harden and Kawhi Leonard be on the roster, not even just next season, but next year? Like that is a reality that I'd never even considered. I think my initial thoughts was that maybe James Harden would be the one to go first. Like I personally think it's going to take one of them asking, like requesting a trade, because just all the messaging coming out from the Clippers right now is that they don't want to move off. It sounds like they don't want to make any big decisions, and for me, those are the big decisions. Is like moving off the stars because that's to me indicating like the team is gonna tank because you're not gonna acquire any stars that's going to get you up the table or give you more wins. For me, they're set with James Harden and Kawhi. So the minute they pull the trigger, even Zubac you can throw in there potentially. I feel like if they move if off any of those three, that's them waving the white flag on the season. It just sounds like they're not willing to do that right now. And I think it's going to take like James Harden or Kawhi throwing a trade request in. And I think that to me, it's more like James Harden. That's just because he's the one who needs the title. He's the one, he could argue he's playing well at the moment and benefit from move. He's done it many times in his career. Not that Kawhi hasn't. Like obviously Kawhi's got his history from Spurs and trying to get out there. Again, I think it'll probably take more like ill feeling in the franchise, more fallouts, more that kind of thing. I think James would be more for basketball reasons. I think Kawhi is happy, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know he's not happy losing right now, but he's in LA. It's where he wanted to be. It's where he's continued to sign. There is the alleged and potential entanglement with the Clippers and all the goings on with aspiration. Again, I will say that's alleged entanglement with yeah, the aspiration rumors, etc. So I don't think he's in a rush, and I don't think his uncle's in a rush to get him out of LA right now.
Uncle Dennis, good old Uncle
Uncle
Dennis.
Dennis, yeah. But for James, I could definitely see it. And if there's obviously a few pieces they can move, it's probably Zoo, probably John Collins. But I think that would be moves to get them winning again, not to reset on the season, unless the Clippers are bought out and get a new owner who wants a complete new strategy. Like I think this does come from Steve, the sort of wanting to win. He's said many times about his opposition to tanking, and if there was ever a time he's going to change that, it wouldn't be right now because the Clippers don't have any incentive. Even if the owner was like, "Yeah, I'm all about tanking. It's the new strategy. Like it's the new way to go." Like we've seen it with the Thunder and Pacers and all these teams who've built up young rosters with talent from the draft. Like this is the one time you don't tank because you don't own your draft pick. There's nothing you can get out of tanking. Um, you need to keep winning. So it's gonna be moves around the margins. I think that's what the reporting has been. But yeah, if we know James Harden, that is someone I think that can put in the trade request. But yeah, I think all those destinations sound likely, and I think if there was any team out of there that you've just mentioned, Josh, I would probably say it's the ones who are probably on the outside a little bit, who maybe need like a little bit more just to like put them in the front line. I'd be surprised if Boston. I was surprised if the Detroit Pistons took a swing, given how well they've been playing this year. But I could definitely see like franchises like the Bucks who are trying to keep guys like Giannis happy. There's been a lot of rumors there. Even teams like Memphis, who are obviously going through their own situation. Those kind of teams are more desperate to make a trade. Um, the Hawks is an interesting one because I can't tell. I don't know if you can, but I can't tell what direction they want to go in right now. Whether because I know there's obviously a situation with Porzingis as well, and it sounds like maybe they want to move off him, and he's obviously been injured quite a bit this season. I don't know if they want to hit the hard reset or they want to make a move to continue to win. But obviously, there could be a deal to be done there. I'm not sure, but I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see. It's gonna come around sooner rather than later. At least I hope so, because they can't let this continue any longer. This is it's getting ridiculous now, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the time we return in the new year, Josh, that this record is even more bleak. Which is a horrible way to end the podcast, but it's the reality of the situation right now.
I guess the one thing you can say, like I was just looking at the Clippers payroll there and trying to make like any trades work in my head. And if there are any teams that just want like vets on their roster and believe that like what they're seeing from these guys on the Clippers this season is not necessarily representative of the way they're going to be, or even if it's just like problematic younger guys that other teams are looking to get off, because you kind of end up back in that situation, don't you? Where like I don't want the Clippers to be trading for guys like Josh Primo and Kevin Porter Jr., for example, and the kind of
No.
off-court things that they've done, but maybe guys who've just been more outcasted in their franchise. Jonathan Kuminga obviously doesn't apply in terms of the money, but like somebody like that who's just fallen out with coaching staff and other players and is clearly not a good basketball fit. Like whether there's enough of them around the margins, because Bogdanovich is making 16 million. John Collins making nearly 27 million. So, he feels like an eminently tradable contract. And again, someone I'm not wedded to for the long term. Brook Lopez, I believe, is eligible to be traded again now, if not at least on January 15th. He's making nearly 9
Yeah.
million. Nicholas Batum, who I feel awful for that we would trade him away again when he basically said he wanted to retire in LA, and he went away and then came back. But the Clippers kind of have to be ruthless within this, and they are rapidly losing basketball games, and Nicholas Batum is not contributing to winning basketball. So unfortunately, that 5.6 million he's making this season, and then even the team, I believe that's team option for 5.8 next year. Is just another tradable contract for the Clippers. Chris Dunn and Derek Jones Jr. have mentioned their money, but I kind of want them to stick around. Bradley Beal's not tradable because of the injury, and then it's the young guys. It's Yannick, it's Kobe, it's Cam Christie, and Chris Paul kind of sits in there as any kind of make weight in a deal on a minimum as well. So there are kind of tradable contracts for the Clippers. It might not necessarily get them, the kind of guys that, as I say, can sit in that gap between like role players and and the superstars in terms of Kawhi and James, but maybe you can just acquire enough role players that are younger, hungrier, more athletic, all those kinds of things that can just do something for this team to give it a bit of a different flavor because Lord knows we need some different flavors from the rotten egginess that is that is protruding this season, James.
Yeah, we need it. It's getting way too eggy in Clipperland. Clipper Nation fed up with the rotten eggs, and yeah, we need to see something new. We need to see something new, and I don't know about you, Josh, but I'm more than willing to call it an end to 2025. And I think we've summed up in this podcast, whilst there has been some good parts, like just can't escape this new season and how bad the Clippers have become. And I just wish that we can leave all of this in 2025 and start 26 afresh with opportunities for the Clippers to improve and just get back on the track of trying to win basketball games first and foremost, but ultimately with the goal of winning an NBA championship because that's why we're all here. We all want the Clippers to do it, and whilst I don't think next year will be the one, it certainly doesn't look like it right now. Just moves that are going to put us back in that right direction, and that the franchise has been on in over the course of its life since Steve Ballmer's taken over. So I appreciate everyone for listening and tuning in and watching this year. I think we've become more consistent this season. It's obviously just a shame the Clippers haven't stepped up in the same way, but I think we want to continue that in 2026. I'm hoping there's more to talk about. I'm sure there will be. There's no way this continues, and if it does, we'll still be here week in week out to talk everything Clippers. It's been a pleasure to do it all with you this year, Josh. Looking forward to getting back to it in 2026. That is when our next episode will be out. So this is the last episode of 2025. I think we're looking at maybe recording first week of January, where we'll summarize, if there's been any news, and I'm hoping there has been, or it's not just more Clipper losses to report on and try and salvage a podcast episode out of that. But yeah, I'm hopeful for next year. Appreciate everyone for tuning in. We'll be back 2026. Any final thoughts for the viewers and listeners, Josh, before we wrap this one up?
No, just to say, yeah, thanks for supporting me and James throughout 2025. I've loved doing this podcast. I guess that was one of the more positive things to come out of. Did we start this in 2025, James? I think we did. So one of the more
Yeah.
positive things to come out of this year. And in terms of Clippers fandom, of course, particularly in the second half of the season, me in the second half of the year, sorry, me and James have been looking to get more consistent with this. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's been tuning in. Shout out to everyone in the Clippers UK group chat and any of those guys who've been tuning in as well and supporting what me and James do along the way with retweets and likes and whatever it is across social media. We really appreciate all the support we're getting, and yeah, hopefully me and James will be back out into it dome at some point covering the Clippers from this UK perspective. But before then, we'd like to see trades. We'd like them now, and we want the Clippers to get back to looking like a franchise that can ever win a game of basketball again. But thanks as always, James, for giving me this platform to rant, to talk about eggs and everything in between. It's been a pleasure doing this journey with you of this year, sir.
Echo that completely, Josh. Absolutely loved every episode, despite how depressing the last few months have been. I'm hopeful for 2026, and there will be a point where this turns around, and we'll be able to be excited about Clipper basketball again. I'm incredibly sure of that, and we'll be there for that. And like I said, hopefully next year is the year. I'm going to Intuit Dough for the first time, and you the second. So more to look forward to. Thanks everyone again. Hope everyone enjoys their holidays and New Year, and you too, Josh. And we'll see you on 2026. Go Clips, go.